From the defense minister of Germany to the chief design officer of Apple, we talked to Jony Ive, asking the question, what makes Apple Apple, and what role design plays in the company's identity, its products, and its future.
Here we are. If there's a corporation in the world, perhaps Ferrari, that's so identified with excellence in design, it is Apple. You, building on the legacy you and Steve Jobs created, have just announced with Tim Cook on stage presenting these remarkable products. I want to understand design through the eyes of Jony Ive.
I mean, design is one of those, I think in many ways, massively misunderstood words. I mean, there are so many different sort of definitions of the word design to us. Design's it's far beyond just what something looks like. It's the whole thing. It's how it works. It's how it feels. Now, there are certain things that are easy to represent. Obviously, what something looks like is very often the first sort of connection that you make with a device. You know, you make, I think, a lot of subconscious decisions about the nature of something by what it looks like. You know, you decide how you think you would hold it, how much it should cost, how much how much it would weigh. But
it has to do with products, houses, boats, cars.
It's well, our manufactured. I mean, I remember when I was at art school, and I had this. And now it sounds actually very naive that I could have been studying design for so long. But this realization that what we make describes us. It describes the things that we care about. It describes our values. You know, our values. It describes our preoccupations. And one of the things, it was the first time I came across the Mac. This is in the late 80s. But one thing that happened was I was completely seduced by the object. But then what happened, and it was the first time it happened to me, I wanted to know who made this. Everything around us speaks to who made it. And it speaks to whether they were preoccupied and driven by price and schedule and opportunism, or whether they were driven by care and trying to make a product that would make our lives genuinely better.
It speaks to their values?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very sort of succinct testimony to the group of, I mean, a company is just a group of people that get together to make something. And I think it's a very clear way of understanding what drives that group of people.
So what does this say about Jony Ive?
Well, I think what it says about Apple, because I'm lucky enough
you work with a team.
To work with an incredible team. But, well, one, I think that it says a lot. There's a danger, particularly I think in business. It's one of the things that I've noticed a lot, that in the context of a business in a meeting room, we tend to be much more comfortable talking about product attributes that you can measure with a number. You know, that's a fairly safe conversation to talk about. Well, 5 is bigger than 2, and nobody's going to argue that. So we tend to talk historically about price and speed, and those more emotive, those less tangible product attributes can so easily be ignored. Now, the problem is, you and I both know, we make probably the most important decisions of our lives in the absence of numerical data. I think this says is that we try to go beyond some sort of functional imperative. You know, it just doing the job is just the price of admission. And I think that we care so much more deeply than just trying to get something done.
Okay. Having said that, I mean, speak to me about what, for you, this particular thing, it has rounded edges.
I think that our experience of this as an object is so much more than its appearance.
Yes.
You know, our connection with this is, of course, of course, what it looks like, but it's what it feels like.
Yeah.
The materials it's made from, the more that we get into the detail of trying to understand materials, we become often fairly frustrated and dissatisfied. So that often leads us to developing our own materials. So the glass, the cover glass on the new iPhone is actually a custom developed material. The same as the aluminium on the back. It's an entirely proprietary.
It's a British term for aluminum, isn't it?
It is. It gets confusing, doesn't it? But there's no detail that is too small that gets overlooked in terms of the care that we'll extend. And I think,
even if it's not seen.
Well, I actually think that's. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is we will do things that sometimes it's hard to articulate why you do them beyond it feels like the right thing to do. And from our experience, I think that people perceive value beyond their ability to articulate why.
Yeah.
If you ask somebody why they like something, I truly have found that it has a relationship to the amount of care that was extended in its creation. And it's a difficult one to talk about at the risk of sounding slightly grand in aspiration, but I think that we've found that when we care, when we design the inside of this product, that not many people will see. When we extend that sort of care, we feel that we're making a contribution to culture and to humanity. I do believe that people sense care in the same way I think that we sense carelessness. I think we sense opportunistic products that were just developed quickly and to a price. I think people sense that
people
care.
sense that they look at this and they say, the people who made this cared. They cared about how it felt. They cared about how it held.
Yes.
They cared about, how it performed.
Yes.
But it was a whole package. They cared about its functionality. But the overall impression, the first impression, is the things, the tactileness of it.
Yes.
The thinness of it.
I mean, it's your experience of a product, I think, is so many of those different attributes combined. I think it's as you said, I mean, one of the struggles we have very often is that your experience of a product sometimes can be difficult for us to communicate if we can't give you one and let you experience it right now.
You can't say it until you've seen it.
Yeah, until you've seen it, until you've felt it. Like, for example, the tactile feedback. We had to develop an entirely new technology because the existing technologies, I think, produced a sort of a buzz that really wasn't anything to do with the sort of experience that we were trying to develop.
This iPhone 6S Plus can do some remarkable things.
Yes.
Things that we never thought could come.
Yes.
From something like this. The power of it, the capacity to take photographs, the capacity to take live photos, in a sense, so you can see it right before.
Yes. Yes.
And what was happening right before the still photo was taken. The capacity you can make a movie with this in a second. George Lucas told me he could make a movie with this. True.
Yes.
It's that good.
Yeah. The capability is, it's humbling, isn't it? I mean, what you can do, it's the stuff of dreams, really. I mean, if we were standing here 8 years ago and we had a product of this size and then a list of its capability, I truly think we would find it hard to even comprehend, let alone believe that was going to be possible.
What are you most proud of in this thing that's in my hand? Is there one thing, or is it simply the totality of the thing?
I mean, there are lots of little details that would be so easy to overlook as really, in the big scheme, not as being important, but they are. But if there was one thing, it is the incredible collaboration of different areas of expertise, groups who are the best in the world, contributing to make this holistic product. I mean, we were earlier this morning, we were listening about just the raw capability of the silicon that the teams developed for this product. Now, that wasn't, we don't just buy silicon off the shelf and just perform some sort of integration. We have this phenomenal team of silicon designers who will custom design the silicon in this product to address and to provide the capabilities that we were hoping for. And so to me, it's just stepping back and realizing how many different areas of expertise come together to make this singular product. And I still...
And how many years?
Well, I mean, and that's the interesting thing, is that because we're such tight teams, and because people tend to stay for years and years and years. I mean, you know, I've been at Apple for 20 plus years, and the designers I work with have as well. What happens is when we make a product and we launch a physical thing, there's another product that people don't tend to talk about, which is in some ways arguably more significant, and that's all that we learn.
And you can live with that.
Products
you fall in love with, but you couldn't solve a problem.
I think this is such an interesting point that I think is often really not understood, in that for the things you saw this morning, there are many products that sit on shelves back in the studio. And one of the things that is not obvious is that when we're working on something new, we don't know it. I mean, we don't know that it's going to work. And so each time you come up against something that seems insurmountable and that there doesn't appear to be any solution, you're presented with a choice in that you can agree, and a lot of people would support the decision that, yeah, okay, this doesn't work, it's not a very good idea. You can try and push on, but you have to think, well, at what point am I going to sort of acquiesce and agree with everybody, yet you're right, this isn't going to work. And I think it's one of the issues that's curious is that when we're copied, we understand that, okay, this product was copied and these features were copied. But one of the huge benefits of following is that there's a proof of concept. People know that this does work and there is a solution.
Yeah.
And I think one of our wrestles is to try and know, you know what, this isn't going to work. We're going to stop and put this on the shelf. And it's one of the reasons we don't talk about the many things that we're exploring, because many of them don't work.
Yeah. But do some work later when they didn't work now?
They do. That's another reason we don't talk about them.
Yeah. But technology or whatever may change, the size of things.
Yes.
New materials that come on stream.
That's one of the things that still fascinates me, is that you think you're solving this problem here, and then you actually end up spending 8 months working on something that's orthogonal. Because that's what you needed to solve to do this here. You don't get there, this doesn't work, and you shelve it, and then 18 months later some fabulously clever person comes up with the solution, and then it's relevant again.
Yeah. Maybe they see it with fresh eyes.
I think so. I think sometimes it's fresh eyes, sometimes it's just that they learned some things. Yeah, because of developing other products. But there's one of the things that I think we all in the design team really love is that this sense that how fluid this all is. So when you've tried something and it's hard to say, we were wrong, this doesn't work, and you put it aside, how things are constantly changing and moving, and as long as you're inquisitive, and as long as you love exploring, it's remarkable to me how we can be surprised and suddenly see something that just appeared completely irrelevant and as if it would never work, suddenly becomes compelling again.
Do you feel that somehow you just landed at the place that you were meant to be, and that this became a place that would call on you the fullest use of your intelligence and creativity and capacity?
I think that when I was at college, I really struggled with technology, and this was in the 80s, and that's when I discovered the Mac, and that's what caused me. I was so in so many. You see, I assumed that because I couldn't use the computers that were available to me, I assumed that that was my problem. I think it's a curious thing with technology that if you can't use it, you assume the problem's with you. Now, I mean, if we eat something and we don't like the taste of the food, we don't assume that that's our problem. We assume it's the food, don't we? And so, of course, I thought, oh, this is me. I was technically inept. And I discovered the Mac, and I was absolutely blown away.
Yeah.
And so I researched and found out more and more about Apple, and thought this was a group of people that I wanted to join and wanted to work alongside from and learn. And I was in my early 20s then, and as a design consultant, I stayed in London, and I had a number of clients, but Apple were one, and my favorite client.
And they fell in love with you too.
We got on so well.
And this was before Steve.
This was in the early 90s, and this was a point when Apple was really struggling really to find its own voice again and to define its own future and its own agenda and reason for being, and sadly started to look to competitors to define, some sort of agenda. But I moved from London over to Cupertino, and still some of the principles that Steve had established at the company's founding was still in existence. Yeah. And so when he returned, it was beyond fabulous. Even though I've been doing this for a long time, the creative process, I'm still completely in awe. I mean, it's the most remarkable process where you start with an idea that can exist with one person and it's in your head, and you argue it backwards and forwards, and you talk to yourself, and then you talk to somebody else, but it's just you and I talking about an idea. But it's still a very, it's a fairly sort of internal, introspective process, I think. But one of the things that I've loved, one is that, on Monday, there's not an idea. Monday morning is like a usual Monday morning.
Yeah.
And unscheduled, unpredicted, Monday afternoon at 2, there's this interesting thought that is fragile and tentative, that starts to gain a little momentum and gets more compelling. And there's something that happens in this process that when you give body, as in make a model, make a prototype, when you give body to an idea, everything changes. When you can walk into a room where it's been before a fairly exclusive, and I mean that in the purest sense of the word, it hasn't been a very inclusive discussion. When you can put the first model down, for one, I mean, everyone looks at the same thing. Yeah. I mean, it galvanizes everybody, and it includes people, and it's I don't know how many times I've been lucky enough to be part of this process, and every time I just think, I can't believe how fortunate I am to be tagging along on this.
Because it's so what?
You look at a company like Apple, there are very specific, there are specific deliverables, there are many things we do that we can talk about with a number.
Yeah.
And this whole process doesn't track necessarily to schedules. That's not our goal, is to meet a schedule. If it's, I on many occasions, we've been brave enough when we think the work isn't really as good as we think we should do. We'll cancel something or delay something. But I think it's wonderful that a process as unpredictable and as volatile and as surprising can sit so happily, in many ways, at the center of so much of what Apple does. And I think it sits there because our prime concern is making stuff for our customers, for people. We don't do this. We don't do this for ourselves. Yeah. And I don't know. I still think it's really quite lovely that people who aren't necessarily comfortable with the process, it's just not something that's naturally comfortable. They are patient because they've been through the process a few times, and they've come to love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very special process.
We just saw products that have been years in the making, products being refined, products being made better. They came off of a table at some point in your design studio, and you work, and you shape, and you modify, and you agonize, and all of a sudden, there's a day, like today, where it's no longer just yours.
Yes.
You almost it's like a bird you've been holding, and you let it fly away.
I thought this would change, I don't know, perhaps get easier. But it's a fairly shocking process when you've been working on something quietly. You're not sure whether it's going to work out or not. You have tremendous dreams for it and a deep enthusiasm, but you're working quietly and you don't talk about it very much beyond, those of your immediate work colleagues. But it's absolutely yours, and there's only a few of you that know about it. And then you get to this remarkably rude and very abrupt point in time where suddenly it goes from just a few people to hundreds of thousands of people know at exactly the same time all about it. And one, that's shocking, and of course it's nerve-wracking because...
Is it wrenching?
There's an odd contradiction here, which is when you're trying to do something new and there's a whole list of reasons why this will not work, there has to be part of you that's unreasonable and resolute. And so, I mean, without that sort of character attribute, you'd give up at the first sort of obstacle. And so you're resolute and believe this can be done. But at the same time, you're very concerned that is it going to be useful and is it going to improve people's lives? Are people going to like it?
So is that what it is? Whether they will see it as something that improves their life?
Absolutely.
Whether it is to communicate with others or whether it is to monitor their own life?
It can be the smallest thing that you see somebody using a product that you've worked on.
Yeah, what's that like?
And you think that was really worth it because, this costs materially. We make a lot of decisions that have huge personal impacts because this takes a lot of time. And that sense of focus and being that resolute and deciding to ignore very, very smart people who have 7 reasons why this is an ill-conceived idea and probably won't work, to ignore really smart people, I find personally very hard. And so with that sort of focus, when you then see somebody using it and you'll see, across a room and somebody smiles, that makes all the difference. We aren't, while we can't second guess people, and so you have to reference yourself while you're developing it, we're very clear that the goal of this is to make products for our customers. I mean, that's why we're doing this. And if our customers don't like the product, then I see that we've failed.
You once said, I think, that People don't understand how practical we are.
I think one of the things that I think characterizes the design process, and I think many creative processes, is that there's this wonderful flipping between broad philosophical discussions and, okay, let's go and try and make this. Doesn't matter how much more, we can talk about this for another week. Let's actually make it and see what happens. And so I think that, and I think that's partly because we are both a hardware and a software company, and we know that building prototypes and trying to represent or experience something that we're working on is unbelievably important. But yeah, I think that we are practical. We the design studio has a big studio where we can sit and draw. It also has a very big workshop where we can go in and make things.
Yeah. Do you create pressure for yourself because you know that there's an iPhone and you feel incumbent to make it better?
I think people deserve us developing something that's truly better. I think there are many products out there that really are, they're just different. Now there's a danger as designers, because so much of what you're doing, you're living in the future, and you are by definition creating something that doesn't exist yet, as in it's new. But the important thing to remember is that there isn't an inherent value in new. I mean, you and I could go and figure out something in half an hour that would be a new product. Doesn't mean that it has any value and anybody will be interested in it. But there's a danger that there are a lot of products that surround us whose only virtue, and I obviously don't believe it's a virtue, is that they're new. What's really hard is to try and do something that's better. And we've tried hard to resist that temptation when we're developing a product or refining a product to, at the end of the day you could say, well, really it's just different, or it's just new. And because there is what appears to be sometimes an insatiable appetite for the new, that's, other people can take care of that.
What does perfection mean to you?
Well, perfection to me establishes and describes a goal. It's something that I long ago resigned myself to, knowing that I will try and get closer and closer, but it's still that hill that's just, that too far away. But it
a bridge too far.
It really is. It's one of those things, though, that the pursuit of perfection, it shapes you, and it configures you, and it establishes the things that you think are important. It infuriates you when you think you're getting closer, and you realize that you're not. But I think there are many of us that are driven by trying to make something that's perfect, and somehow something that's perfect seems to me it's more than just that it's nothing wrong. I think we want to be more ambitious than making something that isn't wrong. But yeah, it drives us.
I wonder if we'll even know perfection if we hit it.
Yeah, I
don't know.
Sometimes I think you just get the faintest glimpse of an attribute that you think, I don't know how that could be better. And then this is the problem with learning, isn't it? The problem with learning more, and the problem with being inquisitive and wanting to explore, is that your view of the world is constantly changing.
But do you look at the iPhone 6s, iPhone 6 Plus, you look at the iPad Pro and say that's as good as it can be? I know there's nothing I could do to make it better. I may later, but I don't now.
Yes. I think right now we look at these products and we do see things that immediately we want to make. better, but sincerely can stand together as an extended group and say, you know, this is as good as we know how, and we really tried. We really tried.
And it's hard for you to release it if you know that you're not there, to say, I don't know how to get from here to there, but I know that everything I know to do has gotten us here, and there's nothing I know to get. Even though I'd like to be somewhere beyond this, I don't know how to get there. And therefore, I'm going to...
Well, we have in the past, I'm sure we will in the future, decide that, I mean, there is a threshold that we have to meet.
Yeah.
And we have, and we will just decide, you know, like sometimes when I catch myself talking a bit too loud, and realize that I'm trying to convince myself, we know that it's not good enough.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I just feel so grateful to be part of Apple, because if our goal was to make money, I couldn't entertain feelings like that. You know, it would have to be, well, there's a schedule to be met,
right,
and we have to ship that. Fortunately, that's not our goal, and so...
But you do have deadlines, don't you?
We have deadlines, but we also have a sense of, you know, our pursuit for excellence. Yeah. And so when we don't meet that, we will delay the product.
But can you say that you stayed at Apple and you were here? You had this phenomenal relationship with Steve Jobs and other colleagues, Tim and Eddie and others, but that somehow you knew, you know, that this place here, that this culture here,
yes,
was different.
Oh, absolutely.
And that the imperative to create something was driven by something different. And I'm saying this to a person who was part of the creation of a product that has made you, this company, the most valuable company in the world, and lots of people very rich, because you created a product everybody wanted to have, and sold more than anybody could have ever imagined.
Yes. Well, I think...
So there's business to this, there's commerce to this. There is the desire for everybody to feel, love, buy.
There is business and there is commerce, but we're very clear about the hierarchies here. And so we've been very clear that we expect those concerns to be consequences of us doing our job right. And so our job isn't to make money for Apple. Our job is to try and make the very best products that we can. Now, we trust if they are good, and we trust if we're competent and we do our jobs in trying to describe them, and if we're competent in making them, they will be attractive and bought, they will be bought in volume, and that we will eventually make money. Now, I'm aware, of course, that can sound incredibly simplistic. I'm aware that that can sound like an easy thing to say, given our vantage point right now. But that's actually what we said in '98, when the company was struggling. You see, we didn't say that the goal was turnaround, because if we'd said the goal back in the late '90s was to turn the company around, that's all about money. You can turn a company around by spending less and trying to make a bit more money. What we said back in the '90s was the goal was to stop making products that weren't great, and the goal was to focus on trying to make a great consumer product.
Did this happen when Steve Jobs came back?
That's when Steve came back. That's how he articulated what the goals of the company needed to be. And this wasn't some subtle, this wasn't an exercise in sort of clever wordsmithing. This was describing profoundly different attitudes and approaches to what the problem was at hand. It takes a tremendous courage when you're losing fabulously large amounts of money to say our goal isn't turnaround, our goal is to make a great product. That's not a natural sort of reflex to that situation. The reflex is, well, let's not spend this money and let's try and get a little bit more because we're about to go out of business.
Let's save the company by...
That's right. And I think that one of the things that we've worked hard on is the way that we describe the problem. And this is where I think language is so interesting, because these ideas generally start as there's a thought, but it becomes quite quickly words and discussions and arguments, even if they're with yourself. It's very easy to make, I think, dramatic assumptions, that if you make these assumptions, and they're often language-based, it's easy to make those and then miss huge opportunity. And so I think this was something that Steve was very, very thoughtful about, and very, there was a lot of intention behind the words he used. It wasn't just sort of like this. It was exactly these words to describe exactly this goal. And there's a whole world of difference between this goal and the rather sloppy way, perhaps, that we would describe what we thought the goal was.
Did you know him before he came to take over the company?
I'd never met him. And that was what was so curious to me, because to see this product and a reaction to be, who made this? Not what does it do, and who made this? Where did they do this? In California, this is... And so I felt an immediate sense of his, what he thought was important. And I think that was one of the reasons why when we first met, we clicked in the way that we did.
Can you say that you stayed at Apple and you were here? You had this phenomenal relationship with Steve Jobs and other colleagues, Tim and Eddie and others, but that somehow you knew, that this place here, that this culture here,
yes,
was different.
Oh, absolutely.
And that the imperative to create something was driven by something different. And I'm saying this to a person who was part of the creation of a product that has made you, this company, the most valuable company in the world, and lots of people very rich, because you created a product everybody wanted to have, and sold more than anybody could have ever imagined.
Yes. Well, I think...
So there's business to this, there's commerce to this. There is the desire for everybody to feel, love, buy.
There is business and there is commerce, but we're very clear about the hierarchies here. And so we've been very clear that we expect those concerns to be consequences of us doing our job right. And so our job isn't to make money for Apple. Our job is to try and make the very best products that we can. Now, we trust if they are good, and we trust if we're competent and we do our jobs in trying to describe them, and if we're competent in making them, they will be attractive and bought, they will be bought in volume, and that we will eventually make money. Now, I'm aware, of course, that can sound incredibly simplistic. I'm aware that that can sound like an easy thing to say, given our vantage point right now. But that's actually what we said in '98, when the company was struggling. You see, we didn't say that the goal was turnaround, because if we'd said the goal back in the late '90s was to turn the company around, that's all about money. You can turn a company around by spending less and trying to make a bit more money. What we said back in the '90s was the goal was to stop making products that weren't great, and the goal was to focus on trying to make a great consumer product.
Did this happen when Steve Jobs came back?
That's when Steve came back. That's how he articulated what the goals of the company needed to be. And this wasn't some subtle, this wasn't an exercise in sort of clever wordsmithing. This was describing profoundly different attitudes and approaches to what the problem was at hand. And it takes a tremendous courage when you're losing fabulously large amounts of money to say our goal isn't turnaround, our goal is to make a great product. That's not a natural sort of reflex to that situation. The reflex is, well, let's not spend this money and let's try and get a little bit more because we're about to go out of business.
Let's save the company by...
That's right. And so I think that one of the things that we've worked hard on is the way that we describe the problem. And this is where I think language is so interesting, because these ideas generally start as there's a thought, but it becomes quite quickly words and discussions and arguments, even if they're with yourself. It's very easy to make, I think, dramatic assumptions that if you make these assumptions, and they're often language-based, it's easy to make those and then miss huge opportunity. And so I think this was something that Steve was very, very thoughtful about, and very, there was a lot of intention behind the words he used. It wasn't just sort of like this. It was exactly these words to describe exactly this goal. And there's a whole world of difference between this goal and the rather sloppy way, perhaps, that we would describe what we thought the goal was.
Did you know him before he came to take over the company?
No, it's interesting. I think, as I described how I think that things that you do describe who you are, via the work that he did, I knew him. I'd never met him. And that was what was so curious to me, because to see this product and a reaction to be, who made this? Not what does it do, and who made this? Where did they do this? In California, this is... And so I felt an immediate sense of his, what he thought was important. And I think that was one of the reasons why when we first met, we clicked in the way that we did.
Tell me about first meeting
him. I first met him, he came over to the design studio, and what he saw was, this was in '97, I think, and he saw a huge amount of design work that never made it beyond models. And so at one level we could say, well, we've made and we've been exploring some interesting designs, but all we did with the designs was dust them, and only a handful of people saw them. And he recognized the work and was compelled and interested in it. But he also did mention how, incredibly ineffective I'd been. And he was absolutely right, because we had storerooms full of models. But that's when we first met, and on that very same day, we left the studio and went quietly to another room and started work on what became the iMac. But we met that day and we started that product that day.
And he became your closest friend?
We became extremely close.
Soon?
Very quickly. Yeah, it was, I don't know, I guess I tend to have now I believe a completely odd view that things of substance and depth take a long time. I think that shattered that view I had, which was we could become profound and deep, close friends extraordinarily quickly.
Well, what was it, other than, I know you and your relationship with Mark, same
right.
thing.
Yes. I think one of the...
design genius.
I think one of the things was that we see the world, we all see the same physical things around us. Sat here we do. But there is something that happens between what we see and what we perceive. And that's a function, I think, of you know, how we grew up, what our cultural references were growing up, how, you know, just the sorts of curiosities we have. And so I think everybody has a wonderfully unique way of seeing the world, whether they're conscious of that or not. But I think there was a sense that we realized that we saw things and paid attention to things that we wouldn't even bother mentioning, because we don't need to be reminded that we're the only person right there in that room who noticed that, who paid attention to it. And so I'd spent a lifetime of just noticing things and in a very sort of internal way thinking about them. And I remember one time when we were out shopping together, and I think we were in Italy, and he picked up a knife and looked at it, and I was aware he was looking at this thing, and he put it down, and I thought, oh, that's a nice knife. Picked it up, but I could see like there was a tiny change in the gloss level between the handle. I know this sounds bizarrely obsessive, doesn't it?
No, not to me.
Worryingly so.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see this tiny, shiny change in reflection between the handle and the metal collar. And then I realized it was the glue. And to me, that meant so it was no longer a knife. It was like a bit of metal that had been glued to like a stone handle. And normally, you know, I would have noticed that, wouldn't have said it to anybody else at the risk of sounding slightly fanatical. But realised that we'd both done exactly the same thing. And I think there's some sort of wonderful, you know, that recognition when you realise it's not just you. And I think we realised that very early on. And I think we both loved Apple.
Do you think that both of you had benefit from the fact that you had somebody? Because to say, this may be a dopey idea.
Yes.
But what do you think?
Yeah.
And if you say that to somebody, it means that you think it has some possibilities.
Yes.
And you're reinforced if someone says, and you can trust them to say, yeah, I think so. Because you know that if there is some possibility of seeing something, you'll get it.
I think to have such a wonderfully deep reverence for the creative process that wasn't motivated by what can it do for me. It was so much more pure than that, but a reverence for the creative process. And we both recognized that ideas were tenuous and fragile. And we both were comfortable at laughing at the appalling ideas we had. And we were both quiet enough and sensitive enough to be able to listen to the quiet idea. Because very often I think we assume that this big grand idea that eventually will turn into something that can change the world can, and very often does, start as such a quiet, tentative idea. And that I think we both knew how to listen. Even if it didn't appear that we were paying attention, we would both listen, and it could sometimes be days afterwards that he would say, or I would say, do you remember that thing we said? Or do you remember that thing that so-and-so said? I can't get that out of my mind. And there's a danger that we only pay attention to the loud voice and the articulate voice. And some of the most profound ideas I've heard come quietly and with a humility.
Yeah. By the very nature, they have more power to me.
I think so. Yeah, when somebody who doesn't speak eventually speaks and speaks quietly, it does often give us pause, doesn't it?
Yeah. You both, I mean, you think of yourself as an artist or a designer?
I think of myself
or a builder?
I feel part artist, part designer, part engineer, and part builder. I think part craftsman. I think it's a real mixture. But in all of that, I'm comfortable, genuinely comfortable, with being surprised and being wrong. I don't have, I'm the first person to raise my hand when something I thought was going to be good was just appalling.
You know why that happens?
I think because it actually saves a lot of time.
Yes.
I think that I've seen so much time wasted because of, dogma and just clinging to a view. Wastes a lot of time, steals a lot of air, and bruises a lot of people. And I think we can just save a lot of time it's important to be very self-critical, and I think that it seems efficient to say, you know what, this is my fault, this was a bad idea, and I'm really sorry, I took everybody down this path.
But criticism is crucial, isn't it, in terms of...
I think self-criticism is...
And he clearly believed that, Steve.
He was a great critic, and I learned a tremendous amount.
Because he believed it had value.
If you genuinely care about the product, you have to be very, very explicit and very clear in terms of talking about it and criticizing it. I mean, something I've talked about before, but something I've struggled with. I mean, as part of my role in leading a very cohesive and tight group of designers for 20 plus years, where we are personally close as well as professionally, was having a tendency sort of 10, 15 years ago to be perhaps softer in my feedback. And on an occasion when he had been surgically precise,
precise,
and there was a wake from that surgical precision, from a distance, you can just fixate upon his behavior without even bothering to find out, well, why that happened. And I'd suggested maybe, there was a slightly softer way of giving that feedback. And he said, well, you're not actually bothered about the feelings of those guys, which I was, but not entirely. He said that you're just being vain because you want them to like you. And you're scared that if you are absolutely honest and absolutely direct, they won't. And we have worked very hard to be able to care so much about the work that we don't bring our own personal frailty and our own personal baggage to the evaluation of our work. Because I completely agree, very clear, very harsh criticism is fundamental to what we do and
so
making
you've
things
grown
better.
to appreciate that more?
We figured this out a long time ago, but this has become fairly fundamental to our process and how we work.
You have said our success is a victory for purity, integrity, and giving a damn. And the best thing in the world is to create something that says loudly and clearly, I cared. And it shows by the beauty, the functionality, the sense of specialness.
I think that we couldn't want more than people, when they're using our products, to not be aware of the complexity of the problems that we solved, but for them to be aware of a deep sense of care that we didn't have to express. It would have still switched on. It would have still done and performed the majority of the product's functions. But we went way, way beyond that. And I think that sense that we did care, and we went the extra mile and the extra mile, and again, I think that's part of evolution.
It's evident in the watches, just the care of how you can change the bands.
Yes.
It's evident in how these things are packaged. Packaging.
Yeah, we spend a lot
shows
of time
you care.
on the packaging. We spend a lot of time on trying to be heavy in our thinking so that we can use the materials thoughtfully and lightly. But packaging is more than just protecting the product. You know, it's the first time, you know, you get to see and use your product. You've seen the ones on display. But and we enjoy that. Sometimes, you know, when it's late, and sometimes when it's been, you know, a long month, you can wonder why are we worrying so much about the design of the inside of this card flap that tucks under here that no one will see. But you know it's right, and we feel that we're lucky to be working in a group of people that also believe it's right.
It's a bit like the idea of saying no one will ever know, and you say, I will know.
Yes.
I will know it's not as good as I could have made it.
I think we can say I know, and I think we can say that people will know even if they don't see it with their eyes. I mean, my experience absolutely has been people sense.
What would you do if you didn't do this?
I have no idea. It's all I can do.
It's all you can do.
It's all I can do. Yeah.
But you have a set of skills and you have a remarkable experience, and you have things that reflect insight and commitment, and you know. I sometimes think of you and I ask myself, beyond Apple products,
yes,
is there something that Jony Ive could do, you know, that would change our world even larger?
I mean, at the end of the day, I like drawing and making stuff for people, and I like doing that very sincerely as a way, as a way of serving them. And if I wasn't doing this, I think I would just be drawing and making stuff for friends. And maybe in the end it would just be Christmas tree ornaments. I don't know. But that's what I do. The scale on which I do it, well, I've been very lucky that I've been part of Apple. And that's meant that there's been a tremendous influence, and there's been a reach to what we've been doing. And it's been remarkable that we can together practice our process, which is unusual, which is, I think, fairly unique.
Steve said about you, if I had a spiritual partner at Apple, it's Jony. Jony and I think up most of the products together and then pull others in and say, hey, what do you think? He gets the big picture as well as the most infinitesimal detail about each product. And he understands Apple is a product company. He's not just a designer. That's why he works directly for me. He has more operational power than anyone else at Apple, except me. And now you have even more operational power.
The one thing that I do have a reasonable fluency in is moving from the big picture to the tiny details. And
the fluency.
That sort of fluency of being able to move backwards and forwards, it is a dim reflection of Steve's ability there. And I think
it's a dim reflection of his ability to see, to move from the large, big idea to the infinitesimal carrying out.
He could do that in ways that I aspire to, but only could dream of achieving. But it's a peculiar, I think it's a rare and it's a valuable ability. if you want to make stuff that's significant.
I've always thought that the people who created Apple, Steve, and people who carry it forward,
Yes.
Tim, Eddie, you, and others, that there is a sense that it is what the company stands for. Its values are more important than any product, any of the products. The products may be a reflection of the values,
Yeah.
but it is the values that have created the institution and represent the institution.
I completely agree. I think the products are the physical manifestation of a set of beliefs, a set of preoccupations, and they describe who we are and where our gaze goes, where what we think's important. Saying that, though, it's easy to talk about values and it's easy to talk about culture. It's really, really very hard to make great products. And so
And it takes a lot more than culture? Or it takes the rigorous...
It comes from culture, I think. It comes, but it's the culture is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It needs to be composited with a bloody-minded, resolute view of, we're going to do this. I mean, a lot of, we are very clear about our values, but to do something that is new, that hasn't been done, if it hasn't been done, and if it's of value, there's really good reasons it's not been done. And so when you're confronted with those reasons, you've got two choices. You can say, oh, that's a very good reason, I'm sorry for bothering you. Or you can say, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I'm going to find out more. I'm going to find somebody who's got more experience. And so there's that sort of resolution where, George Bernard Shaw talked about how you have to reject reason to innovate. You have to say, well, we understand, this is all very reasonable, this is what people believe, but you know what, I'm actually going to ignore you completely. Yeah. And if you're a fairly sensitive person, ignoring very smart people is really difficult. And so the values are terribly important, and they're easy to talk about, but there are behaviors that are necessary to actually turn those values into real products. And so
what are those behaviors?
Well, it is that resolution, that determination, those behaviors that can so easily be misinterpreted by people who haven't got a clue about developing products. That sort of unreasonable drive, that decision to ignore expert opinion. That happens every single time we do something that's new.
Yeah. This is what I found out about artists. Artists, they study. You go to a museum with an artist, and you go to a painting, and they're looking at the labor that went into creating the painting. More than the vision, how that stroke was done, how that color was conceived.
Right.
It's almost like a journeyman worker, having great pride and looking for the details that makes excellence. And you have to have the capacity to see that.
Yes.
And know how hard it is to get it.
Yes. Yes.
Which is what you're saying.
I think that's exactly what I'm saying. And that there is I don't think that it's a disconnect, but there are behaviors that are necessary to turn vision and focus and a culture into tangible, manifest products. And those behaviors can sometimes be misinterpreted or not entirely understood.
Is there any possibility that Apple can get too rich and too fat and too complacent to be as good as it has to be?
I mean, I'm sure, I mean, that possibility absolutely exists. I think one of the things that characterizes the way that we work is that our heads tend to be down at these tables, worrying about what we're doing, and our heads don't tend to be up looking around at what we've
Thinking
achieved.
how great we are, what we achieved.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we've tried to stay hungry, and I think we're more aware of the opportunity, and we're more aware of the distance between us and the perfection that we're chasing than ever before. So yes, that danger exists. That's not one that haunts me.
So, but Steve said to those graduates, "Stay hungry."
Yeah.
Stay hungry.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the same thing to take risk when you know that as Bernard Shaw said, it's not reasonable.
Yeah.
It is not reasonable.
Yeah. But I think the way that you stay hungry, I mean, you're not going to be much use if you're just not eating. So I think the way that we stay hungry and we have appetite for more is to be working, and is to be critical, and is to be aware that there's a big gap between our ambition and our vision and what we're doing right now. And that, you know, each time we move forward, I think we're aware that there's still that gap. I actually personally don't, of course, believe that we'll close that gap. You know, it's what drives us.
Let me just take you from growing up. You were around a shop.
Yes.
You knew what you talk about models. That came to you reasonably early, didn't it?
It did. I mean, I grew up with an understanding that everything that surrounded me was made.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that people coming through this room, some will have a sense of the story and the biography behind, you know, each physical object, and some people won't and wouldn't think to ask and wouldn't know. And so that was just one of the things that intrigued me. My father was a very good craftsman. He was a great silversmith. And what I learned early on was that I think really essentially to design, you needed to have a fluency with the material that you were designing in. And that over these years has developed to such a point where, you know, if we're working in a material and we know it, I mean, we really know this inside out, but if we're not happy, we won't accept that. We'll go and develop a new material, our material, and we'll try and make the core material better.
But this capacity to know that things are made and to have a ability to work with your hands has served you as much as your heart and your brain and your...
Yeah, I think that's existed as a very early childhood sort of foundation. It seems as obvious to me as the acquisition of language. You know, it's just this, upon that curiosity that turned into a modicum of understanding, upon that, that's how I started to see the world. And so what tended to happen then was, it was then just a series of questions. Why did they do that like that? Why did they choose this material? Why did they put that on? Even down to just the simple delight. I remember this white alarm clock that didn't work anymore. But I remember taking it to pieces, and when the back, it actually sprang off because of this, you know, the main winding spring inside. But it was, with all of these little cogs, it was like this little city inside, and you never knew it was in there. And I just wondered, is that in the tables? I mean, I was little, and I don't know. I just thought it's so easy to just accept and not ask why. Why is it like that? I don't know if it's part of the human condition, in that we just accept, our surroundings in that way.
One last question. When you're hiring young designers
Yes.
to come here, and they must all want to come here, what are you looking for?
Well, there was a time, the process normally would be somebody would submit a portfolio of work, and that would be reviewed, and we would look at very specifically what they did, their designs. But I've always been more interested in the way people see the world. And this was actually a long time ago now. It was probably about, 9 or 10 years ago. And I arrived late. We were interviewing this guy, and I was late, and I didn't want to be rude. And so I stood outside the conference room, and I listened to him not describe his work, but to describe the world as he saw it. And there was a sensitivity that was breathtaking, and you could hear a pin drop. And without seeing one drawing or one model, without seeing anything that he'd done, decided that we must hire this guy. And so to me, it's just how we see the world, and how and to share that ambition to, based on an understanding, to develop an expertise, to then sincerely join us in trying to make the very best products that we can for each other.
Jony, thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
A remarkable day here at Apple.
Thank you.